Elara never imagined her quiet life as a kindergarten teacher would be upended by a silent, nightly visitor. The first time she saw him, the autumn air had just begun to bite, and a pale mist clung to the wrought iron gates of the Little Sprouts Academy. He was a large dog, the color of faded gold, curled into a tight ball against the unyielding bars. He seemed harmless, a lonely stray seeking the faintest warmth from the school's security lights. But his unwavering stillness, his refusal of the food she left out, hinted at something far deeper. When the first brutal winter storm rolled in, and he still wouldn't leave his post, Elara realized his vigil was not one of desperation, but of devotion. What she would eventually discover, tucked away in the lining of his worn leather collar, would not just explain his presence, it would redefine the very meaning of loyalty. This was no ordinary stray, and this was no ordinary story. This was a promise, carried across hundreds of miles, by a guardian who refused to fail. If you've ever felt a connection that defies explanation, stay with me, because what happened next will remind you that the most powerful bonds are the ones we can't see. The dog became a fixture of the evening, as reliable as the setting sun. Every day, as Elara and the other teachers, Mrs. Gable and Ben, locked up, he would be there. He would materialize from the twilight shadows, his movements fluid and quiet, and settle in his spot. He never made a sound. No barking, no whining. Just a profound, heavy silence that seemed to absorb the ambient noise of the city. In the morning, before the first child's laughter echoed across the playground, he would be gone. "He's still there," Ben said one afternoon, peering through the blinds of the staff room. "Poor fella. Must be getting cold." Mrs. Gable, a woman whose pragmatism was legendary, adjusted her spectacles. "He's not eating the food we leave." A hungry stray wouldn't turn down a meal, her observation hung in the air, a puzzle with no pieces. They had tried everything. Canned food, dry kibble, even a few leftover sausages from a school event. The bowls remained untouched, the water disturbed only by the falling leaves. Elara felt a growing unease. It wasn't fear, it was a deep, resonant empathy. She watched him through the window, saw the way his head was always turned toward the empty playground, as if watching a film only he could see. His posture wasn't that of a defeated animal. It was one of patience, of solemn duty. He was waiting. But for what? Or for whom? The school was empty at night. The children were all tucked into their beds, dreaming of finger paints and story time. One morning, Elara arrived earlier than usual. A thick fog blanketed the street, muffling the world in a shroud of grey. And there he was. He hadn't left yet. He stood, a ghostly silhouette against the gate, his breath pluming in the frigid air. For the first time, she saw him clearly. He was thin, yes, his ribs a subtle contour beneath his thick coat, but he wasn't mangy. His fur, though matted in places, was the kind of deep gold that spoke of a well-loved pet. And around his neck was a simple, dark leather collar. It was old and cracked, but it was a collar nonetheless. He wasn't a stray. Not in the way they had assumed. She took a hesitant step forward. "Hey there," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the silence. The dog's head snapped toward her. His eyes, a startlingly intelligent amber, fixed on her. There was no aggression in his gaze, only a bottomless weariness. He held her stare for a long moment, a silent communication passing between them. Then, as if his duty was done for the night, and her arrival signaled the changing of the guard, he turned and melted back into the fog. Elara stood frozen, a strange ache in her chest. He was on a mission. And whatever it was slowly breaking him. The weather forecast for the end of the week was dire. A system was moving in from the north, promising torrential rain and gale-force winds. The news anchors called it the storm of the season. All Elara could think about was the golden dog. The thought of him, alone, pressed against the cold iron in the driving rain, was unbearable. "We have to do something," she announced in the staff room that Friday. "We can't just leave him out there." Ben nodded in agreement. "We could call animal control again." "They came last week," Mrs. Gable reminded them, her tone laced with frustration. "He vanishes during the day. They can't pick up a dog that isn't there. They said unless he's aggressive or in immediate distress during their operating hours, their hands are tied." "He will be in immediate distress tonight," Ilara insisted, her voice rising with an urgency that surprised even herself. "He'll freeze." That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside her apartment window, rattling the glass. Rain lashed against the panes in violent sheets. Each gust felt like a personal accusation. She imagined the dog, huddled and shivering, his golden fur plastered to his skin, the cold seeping into his bones. He was out there, keeping his silent vigil, while she was warm and safe in her bed. The hypocrisy of it was a physical weight. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She threw on her coat, grabbed a thick wool blanket from her closet, and ran to her car. The drive to the school was treacherous. Branches littered the road, and water pooled in deep, dark puddles. The street lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. As she pulled up to the kindergarten, her headlights cut through the deluge, and her heart clenched. He was there. He was exactly where she knew he would be, pressed into the small recess of the gate, trying to find shelter under an awning that offered almost none. He was soaked, shivering so violently his whole body seemed to vibrate. But his head was up, his amber eyes still fixed on the dark, empty playground. Ilara got out of the car, the blanket held tightly against her chest. The wind tore at her, whipping her hair across her face. "Hey," she called out, her voice nearly stolen by the storm. "Hey, boy. It's okay." He turned his head slowly, his movements stiff with cold. He watched her approach, not with fear, but with a kind of resigned curiosity. He didn't growl. He didn't even stand. He just watched. She knelt in front of him, heedless of the cold puddle soaking through her jeans. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You can't stay out here." She unfolded the blanket and gently, slowly, draped it over his trembling body. He flinched at the initial contact, but then leaned into the fabric, a low, shuddering sigh escaping his lips. It was the first sound she had ever heard him make. As her hands smoothed the blanket over his back, her fingers brushed against his collar. It felt stiff and cold. And then she felt it. A small, hard lump on the inner side, pressed against his neck. It wasn't a tag. It was too thick, and it was stitched into the leather, concealed from view. It felt like a small cylinder, deliberately hidden. A chill, entirely separate from the storm's fury, ran down her spine. This was it. This was the answer. The reason for his vigil, the key to his entire, heartbreaking story, was right here, under her fingertips. "I'm going to help you," she promised, looking into his exhausted, trusting eyes. "I promise." The decision was made in that instant. She couldn't leave him. Not now. "Come on," she urged gently, standing up and opening her car door. "Come with me. Please." The dog looked at her, then back at the school, a visible conflict in his gaze. It was as if he were being asked to abandon his post. For a heartbreaking moment, she thought he would refuse. He took a weak step toward the gate, his loyalty to his unseen mission overriding his own survival. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "You can come back. I swear. Just for tonight. Just to get warm." Something in her voice must have reached him. He stopped, turned, and looked at her one last time. Then, with a final, lingering glance at the dark playground, he limped slowly toward her car, and, with a great effort, hauled his weary body onto the back seat. Ilara shut the door, her hands shaking, and got behind the wheel. The vet's clinic was a 20-minute drive, but it felt like a journey to another world, a world where silent promises might finally be understood. The 24-hour veterinary clinic was an oasis of warmth and light against the storm-ravaged night. Dr. Aries, a man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, met them at the door. He didn't ask questions, just helped Alara guide the shivering dog into an examination room. Leo, as she had decided to call him in her mind, was surprisingly compliant. He allowed the doctor to examine him, to take his temperature, his exhaustion overriding any fear he might have felt. He's severely malnourished and dehydrated, Dr. Aries said, his brow furrowed with concern. And his paws are worn raw. This dog has traveled a very, very long way. He ran a scanner over Leo's back. No microchip. Alara's heart sank a little. A chip would have been too easy. There's something in his collar, she said, her voice hushed. On the inside. I felt it. Dr. Ariz's expression grew more intrigued. He gently unbuckled the worn leather strap. The dog didn't resist, only watched with those ancient, tired eyes. The doctor laid the collar on the stainless steel table and ran his thumb over the inner lining. He stopped, his fingers finding the same hard lump Alara had. You're right, he murmured. It's been stitched in. Very deliberately. He retrieved a small surgical blade. With the precision of a surgeon, he carefully sliced the thick threads holding the hidden pocket closed. The leather parted, revealing a small, hollowed-out space within. Inside, nestled in a bit of old cotton, were two items. The first was a tiny, tarnished silver locket, no bigger than a thumbnail. The second was a piece of paper, rolled into a tight scroll and yellowed with age and exposure. Dr. Aries slid the items onto the table. Go ahead, he said softly. With trembling fingers, Alara picked up the scroll. She carefully unrolled it. The paper was stiff and delicate. It was a child's drawing, rendered in the beautifully clumsy lines of a 5-year-old. A stick-figure girl with a triangle dress and a shock of bright red crayon hair stood beside a big, lopsided yellow dog. They were holding hands, or paws, in the way a child imagines it. Below the drawing, 2 hearts were drawn, one big and one small. She turned the paper over. On the back, in faint, shaky pencil, was a child's scrawl. It took her a moment to decipher the letters. Leo will keep you safe. A gasp escaped her lips. Leo. She had named him Leo in her head, and here it was, his name, written by a child. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She looked at the dog, who was now lying on a soft blanket on the floor, watching her. His name was Leo. And he was keeping someone safe. Or he was trying to. Her hands shook as she picked up the small locket. It was difficult to open, the clasp corroded with time. She used her fingernail to pry it apart. Inside was a minuscule, faded photograph, protected by a piece of cloudy plastic. It was a picture of a little girl, no older than 6, with a cascade of fiery red hair and a face full of freckles. She was hugging a golden dog, her cheek pressed against his furry head, a smile of pure joy on her face. The dog in the picture was younger, healthier, but there was no mistaking him. It was Leo. And the girl. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. She knew that vibrant, unmistakable red hair. It was Lily. Lily, a bright, bubbly little girl who had been in her class last year. A girl whose laughter used to be the loudest on the playground. Lily, whose family had vanished from the town almost overnight. There had been an accident, a terrible car crash that had taken her father's life. Her mother, devastated and overwhelmed, had pulled Lily from the school without a word, and they had simply disappeared. No forwarding address, no phone number. They were just gone. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. Leo wasn't a stray. He was Lily's dog. He hadn't been waiting for food or shelter. He was waiting for a little girl with red hair. He had traveled, for who knows how many days or weeks, back to the last place he knew she had been happy, the last place he had seen her. The kindergarten. His mission, given to him by a 5-year-old, was to keep her safe. And in his loyal, beautiful mind, that meant returning to their shared sanctuary and waiting for her to appear. He had been sleeping on the cold ground, starving, enduring the elements, all to fulfill a child's promise. Tears streamed down Alara's face, hot and silent. She knelt beside Leo and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his damp, clean fur. "Oh, Leo," she sobbed. "You found it. You were so close." The dog, who had been stoic through everything, let out a soft whimper and leaned his heavy head against her shoulder. For the first time since his long journey began, he was not alone. His mission had been understood. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening under a pale sun. Alara, running on caffeine and adrenaline, sat in the staff room with Mrs. Gable and Ben, the locket and the drawing laid out on the table between them. She had explained everything, her voice cracking with emotion as she recounted the night's events. Ben stared at the child's drawing, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "He walked all this way for her?" "We don't know where they moved from," Alara said, "but Dr. Ares said the wear on his paws suggests he's been traveling for weeks, maybe longer. Hundreds of miles." Mrs. Gable, her usual pragmatism replaced by a look of profound respect, picked up the locket. "Lily," she whispered, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I remember her mother, Sarah. So distraught after the accident. She mentioned having to move back in with her own mother, but it was all such a blur. She said they were leaving everything behind. Including Leo," Alara finished, her heart aching for the family and the dog. In the chaos and grief, he must have gotten lost, or perhaps they couldn't take him. And Leo, with nothing but instinct and a promise to guide him, had set out to find his girl. The mission had now changed. It was no longer about saving a dog, it was about reuniting a family. It was about honoring a bond so powerful it had defied starvation, distance, and logic. "The school records," Alara said, looking at Mrs. Gable. "Is there anything? An emergency contact? A grandmother's name?" Mrs. Gable was already moving toward the filing cabinets. "It's a long shot, Alara. They left in such a hurry. But we have to try." They spent hours poring over old files. They found Lily's enrollment forms. The emergency contact was a grandmother, Eleanor Vance, but the address listed was the same as the family's old local one. There was no phone number. However, tucked into a corner of the form, was a small, almost illegible note, "Grandma Crestwood." Crestwood. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A quick search revealed it was a small, rural town about 300 miles north. A quiet, remote place nestled in the mountains. "There can't be that many Eleanor Vances in a town that small," Ben said, a spark of hope in his eyes. The search began in earnest. They called the Crestwood Town Hall, the post office, the library. Alara explained the story over and over, her voice filled with a desperate plea. Most people were sympathetic, but couldn't help. Then, on their 5th call, to the small Crestwood Community Library, they found their miracle. The librarian, a woman named Martha, listened patiently. When Alara mentioned a little girl with red hair named Lily and a lost golden dog named Leo, Martha gasped. "Oh, my word," she said, her voice warm and kind. "You're talking about Sarah and Lily?" "Yes, they live here with Eleanor. They moved in about 4 months ago. It's been so hard on them. Little Lily, she draws pictures of her dog every single day. She leaves them on the porch for him, hoping he'll find his way home." Alara felt a fresh wave of tears well in her eyes. "He did," she whispered into the phone. "He found his way. Can you give me their number? The phone call to Sarah was one of the most emotional experiences of Ilara's life. When she explained who she was and that she had found Leo, there was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then came a choked sob. Leo? My Leo? You found him? Is he okay? He's safe, Ilara reassured her, smiling through her tears. He's right here with me. He's a hero, Sarah. He came all the way back to the school, looking for Lily. Sarah's story came tumbling out between sobs of relief and disbelief. In the frantic, grief-stricken days after her husband's death, they had to pack up their lives. During the move to her mother's house, Leo, spooked by the moving truck, had bolted. They had spent weeks searching, putting up flyers, calling shelters. They had been utterly heartbroken, forced to assume the worst. Lily had been inconsolable. There was no question about what came next. We'll bring him to you, Ilara said, not even hesitating. Ben and we can leave tomorrow. The next day, with Leo resting comfortably in the back of Ben's SUV, they began the final leg of his journey. Leo seemed to sense the shift. His anxious energy was gone, replaced by a quiet anticipation. He sat with his head resting between the front seats, his amber eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if he knew he was finally going home. Crestwood was a postcard town, all quaint houses and tree-lined streets. The address the librarian had given them led to a small, blue house with a welcoming porch. And sitting on the top step, her small shoulders slumped, was a little girl with a blaze of red hair. Before the car had even come to a complete stop, Leo began to whine. It was a low, eager sound that vibrated through the entire vehicle. The moment Ben put the car in park, Leo was scrambling, his paws scratching at the door. Ilara opened it, and he shot out like a golden arrow. The little girl on the porch looked up, her eyes widening in disbelief. Her mouth formed a small O. Leo, she whispered, the name a fragile breath of hope. He barked. A single, joyous, resounding bark that echoed through the quiet street. It was the answer to 1,000 silent prayers. Lily scrambled to her feet and ran. Leo, she shrieked, her voice filled with pure, unadulterated joy. She met him in the middle of the lawn, a tiny girl and her enormous, faithful dog. They collided in an embrace of fur and tears and laughter. Leo licked every inch of her face, his tail thumping a frantic rhythm against the grass, while Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed his name over and over again. A woman, Sarah, burst from the front door, her hands flying to her mouth as she saw the impossible scene unfolding on her lawn. Tears streamed down her face as she sank to her knees, watching the reunion. Ilara and Ben stood by the car, silent witnesses to the sacred moment. This was the culmination of it all. The cold nights, the desperate journey, the silent vigil. It had all led to this perfect, beautiful reunion. It was more than a dog finding his owner. It was a piece of a shattered family being put back together. It was a testament to a love that knew no bounds, a loyalty that had navigated a path back to the one heart it called home. Months passed. Winter gave way to a gentle spring. Ilara received a package in the mail. Inside was a framed drawing. It was from Lily. This time, the stick-figure girl and the big yellow dog were standing in front of a small blue house, and both of their faces had wide, happy smiles. Tucked behind the frame was a letter from Sarah, filled with gratitude and updates. Leo was happy and healthy, and Lily was laughing again. He had not only found his way home, he had brought hope back with him. What began with a mysterious dog sleeping outside a kindergarten had become the most profound lesson of Ilara's life. She learned that courage isn't always loud, and that the deepest promises are often unspoken. Leo, the silent guardian, had taught them all that there is no force on earth more powerful than a loyal heart on a journey home. Sometimes, we see what appears to be a lost soul, a stray without a purpose. But if we look closer, If we have the courage to understand, we might just find a hero in the middle of their greatest mission.